The smallest hearts often carry the greatest courage. No creature should face the world alone, especially one born into darkness. In the frozen woods where winter shows no mercy, a tiny blind puppy fought for his life with nothing but hope. He was barely old enough to walk, abandoned and shivering in the snow. The darkness that filled his world wasn't just from his blindness. It was the cold reality of being utterly alone. But fate had other plans. A golden retriever named Sunny discovered him, her gentle mouth lifting him to safety. She carried him home to Lydia, a woman rebuilding her own life after heartbreak. What would happen when three wounded souls found healing in each other's company? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cottage sat nestled against the mountainside like a prayer answered. Its stone walls weathered by decades of mountain storms and blessed by countless sunrises. Lydia hadn't expected to find peace here when she'd first returned 6 months ago. Her marriage dissolved and her confidence shattered. She'd inherited the place from her grandmother, a woman who had taught her that sometimes going backward was the only way to move forward. The afternoon light filtered through frost-covered windows as Lydia knelt beside the fireplace, the tiny puppy wrapped in her softest towel. His breathing had steadied, no longer the desperate gasps she'd heard when Sunny first brought him inside. The golden retriever sat nearby, her amber eyes never leaving the small bundle, as if she understood the gravity of what she'd done. Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she examined the puppy more closely. He was so small, probably no more than 8 weeks old, with fur that might have been golden like Sunny's if it weren't matted with snow and dirt. His eyes were closed, but something about the way he held his head told her there might be more challenges ahead than just recovery from the cold. "What were you thinking, bringing him here?" she whispered to Sunny, though her voice carried more wonder than reproach. The retriever had appeared at Lydia's door 18 months ago, during the worst of her divorce proceedings. A stray who seemed to understand that sometimes the lost find each other. Sunny had never brought home anything before, not even a stick or a ball. She was dignified in that way that some dogs possess, as if they understand their role in the world extends beyond simple companionship. But tonight, she'd arrived with purpose, her coat dusted with snow, this tiny life held gently in her mouth. The puppy stirred, making a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the whisper of wind. Through the eaves, Lydia reached for the warm milk she'd prepared, testing it against her wrist the way she'd once done for her nephew years ago. The memory brought a familiar ache. She and David had tried for children, but that dream had dissolved along with everything else. As she offered the milk with a small syringe, the puppy's instincts took over. He was hungry, desperately so, and she felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. When had she last felt needed? When had anyone depended on her for their very survival? The cottage had always been a place of refuge. Her grandmother had raised 4 children here after her grandfather died young. During the Depression, she'd fed neighbors from her garden and offered shelter to travelers passing through. The walls seemed to hold memories of kindness, of making do, of finding strength in simple acts of love. Lydia had fled here after the lawyers finished dividing her life into asset columns and custody arrangements for pets they'd never had. The cottage had offered silence when the world felt too loud, solitude when people's pitying looks became unbearable. She'd spent months walking the mountain trails with Sunny, slowly remembering who she'd been before she became half of a failing marriage. The puppy finished feeding and settled against her palm, his tiny body generating surprising warmth. She could feel his heartbeat, quick but steady, and something in her own chest seemed to unlock. In her jacket pocket, the small velvet box containing her wedding ring felt heavier than usual. She'd carried it everywhere since the divorce, unable to throw it away, unable to put it back on, unable to decide what it represented now. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into," she told the puppy softly. "I'm not exactly the nurturing type these days." But Sunny looked at her with those knowing eyes, and Lydia wondered if the dog saw something she couldn't see in herself. Animals had a way of recognizing what people needed before they knew it themselves. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the knotted pine walls. Her grandmother's furniture remained the rocking chair where she'd nursed babies and mended. Clothes the long table where she'd rolled out bread dough and helped children with homework. Lydia had changed nothing, as if preserving the space might help her find her own way back to wholeness. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The storm that had nearly claimed this small life was gathering strength. She imagined him out there alone, blind and helpless, his tiny body giving up heat to the merciless cold. The thought made her hold him closer. "We'll call Dr. Martinez in the morning," she said, more to herself than to Sunny. "Make sure you're healthy, little one." The puppy's breathing deepened into sleep, and she marveled at his trust. He had no reason to believe in safety. His short life had offered only abandonment and exposure. Yet here he was, surrendering completely to her care. When had she last trusted anything so completely? The cottage grew quiet except for the fire's gentle conversation with itself. Sunny stretched out on the hearth rug, her golden coat catching the firelight. She'd claimed that spot the first night she'd arrived, as if she'd always belonged there. Dogs understood home in a way humans seem to forget. It wasn't about ownership or legal documents, but about where love lived. Lydia settled into her grandmother's rocking chair, the puppy cradled against her chest. Through the window, she could see the snow still falling, covering the world in fresh possibility. The mountain held its breath, waiting for morning, waiting for the story to unfold. She thought about the frozen paw prints Sunny must have followed to find him. Somewhere out there, his mother had made an impossible choice, leaving tracks that would lead to rescue rather than return. Perhaps that was what love sometimes required, knowing when to let go so others could step in. The puppy sighed in his sleep, a sound of complete contentment that stirred something long dormant in Lydia's heart. She'd spent so many months protecting herself from feeling too much, from caring too deeply, from risking the kind of pain that came with loving something you might lose. But here was this tiny being who had already lost everything and somehow still possessed the courage to trust, to hope, to believe in tomorrow. His blindness hadn't made him bitter or afraid. It had simply made him more attentive to warmth, to kindness, to the gentle voices that promised safety. As the fire burned low and the cottage settled into evening stillness, Lydia realized that sometimes rescue worked both ways. Sunny had saved the puppy from the storm, but perhaps the puppy would save them all from something far more dangerous, the slow freezing of hearts that had forgotten how to hope. She rocked gently, listening to his breathing, feeling his warmth against her heart, and for the first time in months, she didn't reach for the velvet box in her pocket. Tonight, the present was enough. Dr. Martinez had been caring for animals in these mountains for 37 years, and his gentle hands had delivered more miracles than he bothered to count. His clinic occupied a converted farmhouse on the edge of town, where the waiting room smelled of cedar and hope, and his examination table had seen creatures recover from impossibilities. Lydia sat in the passenger seat of her old pickup truck, the puppy secure in a carrier on her lap, while Sunny pressed her nose against the back window. The morning drive had been quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts about what they might learn. "Well now, what do we have here?" Dr. Martinez's voice carried the warmth of someone who had spent decades believing in second chances. His silver beard and gentle eyes reminded Lydia of her grandfather, and she felt some of her anxiety ease. The puppy had eaten well that morning and seemed stronger, but there was still something about the way he held his head, the way his eyes didn't track movement, that had kept Lydia awake most of the night. Sonny found him yesterday evening, nearly frozen in the woods. Lydia explained as Dr. Martinez lifted the puppy from the carrier. I think there might be something wrong with his vision. The veterinarian's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking temperature, heartbeat, reflexes. The puppy submitted to the examination with remarkable patience, as if he understood. These gentle touches were meant to help. Sonny watched from her position near the door, alert but trusting. He's a sturdy little fellow, Dr. Martinez murmured, using a small flashlight to examine the puppy's eyes. His expression grew more serious, and Lydia felt her chest tighten. What is it? His pupils aren't responding to light, and there's some cloudiness in both corneas. The doctor's voice remained calm, but Lydia heard the weight in his words. I'm afraid this little one was born with congenital blindness. He'll never see the world the way we do. The words hit Lydia like cold water. She'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed felt different. This wasn't a temporary injury that would heal with time and care. This was permanent, life-altering, a challenge that would affect every day of his existence. Can anything be done? She asked, though she already knew the answer from the doctor's expression. Surgery isn't an option in this case. The blindness is complete and irreversible. Dr. Martinez continued his examination, checking the puppy's hearing, his reflexes, his overall development. But I want you to understand something important. Dogs adapt to blindness far better than humans do. They rely on their other senses so naturally that many blind dogs live completely normal, happy lives. The puppy made a small sound and turned, his head toward Lydia's voice, his tail giving a tentative wag. Even without sight, he seemed to recognize her as safety, as home. The question you need to ask yourself, Dr. Martinez continued gently, is whether you're prepared for what this means. A blind puppy will require extra patience, extra training, extra vigilance. You'll need to learn the layout of your home. Develop confidence in his other senses, and trust that you'll keep him safe from dangers he can't see. Lydia's mind raced through implications she hadn't considered. Puppy-proofing would be more complex. Training would be different. There would be vet bills, special considerations, the constant awareness that he was vulnerable in ways other dogs weren't. He's also quite young to have been separated from his mother, the doctor added, checking the puppy's teeth and gums. Probably only 7 or 8 weeks old. Normally, I'd say he needs at least 2 more weeks with his littermates to develop proper social skills. What does that mean for his development? It means he'll be looking to you and Sonny for the guidance his mother would have provided. You'll need to teach him not just how to navigate the world, but how to be a dog. Dr. Martinez's eyes twinkled slightly. Fortunately, Sonny strikes me as an excellent teacher. As if she understood the conversation, Sonny moved closer to the examination table, standing where the puppy could hear her breathing. The little one immediately turned toward her, his body relaxing at her presence. I need to be honest with you, Lydia, Dr. Martinez said, setting down his stethoscope. This won't be easy. Many people who take in special needs animals underestimate the commitment involved. There's no shame in recognizing that you might not be ready for this responsibility. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lydia stared at the puppy, so small and trusting, depending on her for decisions that would shape his entire life. 6 months ago, she couldn't even take care of her marriage. How could she possibly take care of a blind puppy? But then she remembered, the night before, the way he'd fallen asleep against her heart, the way his presence had filled the cottage with something it had been missing. She thought about Sonny's inexplicable decision to bring him home, as if the retriever had seen something Lydia couldn't see. What would happen to him if I couldn't keep him? She asked quietly. Dr. Martinez's expression grew somber. Special needs animals are difficult to place. Most people want healthy puppies without complications. He might find a home eventually, but double quotes, he didn't need to finish. They both understood that eventually might never come. The puppy chose that moment to make a small sound, not quite a whimper, but a soft vocalization that seemed to be asking where she was. Without thinking, Lydia extended her hand, and he immediately pressed his nose against her palm, his tail wagging with unmistakable joy. "The good news," Dr. Martinez continued, "is that he's otherwise healthy. Good muscle tone, strong heart, no signs of malnutrition despite his ordeal. His hearing seems excellent, probably better than average to compensate for his vision loss. With proper care and training, he could live a completely normal lifespan." Lydia felt the familiar weight of the ring box in her pocket, the symbol of a commitment she'd failed to keep. Could she make a promise to this helpless creature and keep it? Could she offer him the kind of unwavering dedication that love required? "I know this is a big decision," Dr. Martinez said kindly. "You don't have to decide today. You could foster him while you think it over, see how it goes." But as the puppy nestled against her palm, as Sonny watched with those knowing eyes, Lydia realized the decision had already been made. Perhaps it had been made the moment Sonny placed him in her arms, or when she'd felt his heartbeat against her chest, or when she'd watched him trust her completely despite having every reason to fear. "The world." "No," she said softly. "I don't need time to think about it." Dr. Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Lydia lifted the puppy, feeling his warmth, his trust, his complete dependence on her kindness. "His name is Hope," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "And yes, I'm sure." As they completed the appointment vaccinations, feeding schedules, follow-up care, Lydia felt something shift inside her chest. For months, she'd been focused on what she'd lost, what had been taken from her, what she couldn't control. But here was something she could give, something she could protect, something that needed her specific kind of love. The drive home was different than the drive there. Hope slept peacefully in his carrier. Sonny seemed more relaxed, and Lydia found herself already planning how to make the cottage safe for a blind puppy. The future, which had seemed empty and uncertain that morning, now held purpose. She had no idea that this decision, this commitment to love something, vulnerable and imperfect, would change everything. The leather in Lydia's hands felt supple and familiar as she worked the awl through the holes she'd carefully measured. She hadn't made anything by hand in years. The divorce had left her feeling like her creative instincts had withered along with everything else. But something about Hope's needs had awakened a practical ingenuity she'd forgotten she possessed. The collar was simple brown leather, sized to grow with him, but the small brass bell she'd found in her grandmother's sewing box would serve a crucial purpose. Every movement Hope made would announce his location, helping him understand his place in space while alerting them to his whereabouts. "What do you think, Sonny?" she asked, holding up the finished collar. The retriever lifted her head from where she lay, watching Hope explore the living room, his tiny paws feeling their way across the braided rug with increasing confidence. It had been a week since Dr. Martinez's diagnosis, and the cottage had transformed into a carefully orchestrated training ground. Lydia had spent hours moving furniture to create clear pathways, removing hazards and establishing consistent locations for Hope's food, water, and bedding. Every decision was made with his safety and independence in mind. Hope had grown stronger. Each day, his personality emerging like a flower opening to sunlight. He was curious without being reckless, playful without being destructive, and possessed an intuitive intelligence that seemed to compensate for his lack of sight. When he bumped into obstacles, he didn't panic. He simply backed up and tried a different approach. "Come here, little one," Lydia called softly. Hope's head turned toward her voice immediately, his tail wagging as he navigated toward the sound. His steps were becoming more confident, though he still kept one paw slightly extended to feel for obstacles. She fastened the collar around his neck, adjusting it to accommodate his growth. The bell's gentle chime marked his first tentative steps. And Hope paused, tilting his head to understand this new sound that would now accompany his every move. Sonny approached and sniffed the collar approvingly, then gave Hope's ear a gentle lick. The interaction between the two dogs had fascinated Lydia from the beginning. Sonny seemed to understand Hope's limitations instinctively, positioning herself as both protector and guide without being overprotective. "Bell training," Lydia murmured, remembering Dr. Martinez's advice about helping blind dogs develop spatial awareness. "The sound will help you understand where you are, Hope, and it'll help us find you when you're being too adventurous." The morning light filtering through the windows illuminated the careful choreography they developed. Hope had learned the cottage's rhythms: breakfast at sunrise, training sessions before lunch, afternoon naps by the fire, evening explorations of the garden under careful supervision. Training a blind puppy required patience Lydia hadn't known she possessed. Every lesson had to be taught through sound, scent, and touch. Stay meant feeling a gentle hand on his back. Come meant following the sound of her voice or the rustle of treats. Good boy was always accompanied by physical affection, so he could understand his success. Hope's favorite training exercise involved navigating between two chairs to reach his food bowl. At first, he'd been timid, feeling his way with exaggerated caution. But as his confidence grew, he'd begun to move with purpose, using the bell's echo off the chair legs to gauge distances. "He's mapping the space in his mind," Lydia had told Sonny the day before, watching Hope successfully navigate the obstacle course 3 times in a row. Creating a mental picture of home. The word home had slipped out naturally, and she'd realized with surprise that she meant it. This was Hope's home now, as surely as it was hers and Sonny's. The cottage that had once felt like a refuge from the world now felt like the center of something new and purposeful. Hope's sleeping arrangements had evolved too. The first few nights, he'd whimpered whenever she moved too far away, so she brought his bed into her room. But gradually, as he'd grown more secure, he'd begun spending part of each night on his own, curled up on the living room rug where Sonny could watch over him, independent but not alone. She'd written in the journal she'd started keeping, documenting his progress and her own observations. He's learning that safety doesn't require constant supervision, just the knowledge that help is nearby when needed. The journal had surprised her too. She hadn't written anything personal since college, but Hope's daily advances seemed worth recording. His first successful navigation of the garden path. The day he'd learned to find his water bowl without help. The afternoon he'd played with a squeaky toy for an hour, batting it around by sound alone. Each entry revealed not just Hope's growth, but her own transformation. The woman who'd arrived at the cottage 6 months ago had been broken, defensive, afraid to invest in anything that might disappoint her again. But caring for Hope required a different kind of courage, the willingness to love something fragile, to commit to challenges she couldn't control, to believe in possibilities she couldn't see. Sonny had been instrumental in Hope's education. The older dog seemed to understand her role as mentor, staying close during new experiences, offering reassurance when Hope encountered difficulties. She'd learned to move more deliberately when Hope was following her, pausing to let him catch up, positioning herself between him and potential hazards. "You're teaching him how to be brave," Lydia observed, watching Sonny encourage Hope to investigate a new scent near the garden gate. The retriever's calm confidence gave Hope permission to explore, to trust that curiosity wouldn't lead to danger. The bell chimed gently as Hope settled down for his afternoon nap, the sound already becoming a comforting part of the cottage's daily music. Lydia settled into her grandmother's rocking chair with her journal, recording the day's small victories. "Week 1 complete," she wrote. Hope ate independently, navigated the living room without assistance, and played fetch with sound alone. More importantly, he seems to understand that this is his place, his family, his life. The collar fits perfectly, and the bell gives him confidence to move freely. Sunny continues to be the perfect teacher, patient but encouraging, protective, but not hovering. She paused, pen hovering over the page, then added, I think I'm learning as much as he is, about patience, about the different ways love shows up, about how healing happens not all at once, but in small, daily choices to trust, to try, to hope. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountain peaks, promising the season's first real snowfall. But inside the cottage, warmth radiated from more than just the fireplace. It came from the gentle chiming of Hope's bell, from Sunny's contented sighs, from the growing certainty that some broken things were meant to be mended together. 3 weeks into their life together, Hope had developed what Lydia could only describe as a mental map of extraordinary precision. She watched in amazement as he navigated from his food bowl to the garden door without a single misstep, his bell chiming a confident rhythm that announced his growing mastery of the cottage's geography. Show off, she said affectionately, and Hope's tail wagged at the warmth in her voice. He'd learned to read the subtle variations in her tone, the difference between playful teasing and genuine praise, between concern and casual conversation. His ears had become remarkably expressive, swiveling to catch nuances that sighted dogs might miss. Sunny had evolved into the perfect teacher, demonstrating patience Lydia envied. The golden retriever would position herself at strategic points during Hope's explorations, offering gentle guidance with a nudge of her nose or a quiet huff when he veered too close to furniture. She'd learned to walk more deliberately when Hope was following, her steady pace giving him confidence to match. Her stride the breakthrough moment had come on a Tuesday morning when Hope successfully navigated the entire cottage, perimeter independently. He'd started at his water bowl, moved to the fireplace, around the sofa, past the kitchen counter, and back to his starting point, a complete circuit without assistance or collision. Did you see that? Lydia had whispered to Sunny, afraid to break the spell. But Hope had heard her excitement and responded with a full-body wiggle of pride that made both women, canine and human being, with shared accomplishment. Training sessions had become the highlight of their days. Hope's intelligence shone through every exercise, his problem-solving abilities compensating beautifully for his blindness. When Lydia moved his food bowl to a new location, he didn't panic. He systematically searched, using scent trails and memory to locate it. When she introduced new obstacles to his familiar routes, he adapted with remarkable flexibility. He's not thinking of himself as disabled, she wrote in her journal that evening. To Hope, this is simply how the world works. He's developing skills, not compensations. There's a difference in that approach that puts my own self-pity to shame. The journal had become her favorite part of each day, a place to process not just Hope's progress but her own emotional recovery. Writing about his courage made her examine her own fears. His adaptability challenged her resistance to change. His trust in tomorrow helped her stop looking backward. Hope's personality continued to unfold like a story she was privileged to witness. He was playful but thoughtful, curious but cautious, affectionate but independent. His favorite game involved a rope toy that squeaked when he bit it. He'd learned to track it by sound, pouncing with impressive accuracy and carrying it around like a trophy. But it was his intuitive understanding of human emotion that surprised Lydia most. The afternoon she'd received divorce papers in the mail, she'd sat at the kitchen table feeling hollowed out by the legal finality of her failed marriage. Hope had appeared at her feet, pressing his warm body against her legs and resting his chin on her lap. He hadn't moved until her tears stopped, as if he sensed that some sorrows required witness rather than solutions. How do you know? She'd asked him, scratching behind his ears. His response had been a gentle sigh that seemed to say that pain was part of love, that sadness didn't mean hopelessness, that tomorrow would offer new possibilities. Sunny watched these interactions with what Lydia could only describe as approval. The older dog seemed to understand that Hope's emotional intelligence was as important as his physical adaptation, that his role in their family extended beyond being cared for. He was also learning to care. The cottage had transformed under Hope's influence. Sharp corners were now padded, loose rugs secured, breakable objects moved to higher shelves. But more significantly, the space felt alive in a way it hadn't since Lydia's childhood visits to her grandmother. There was laughter again, conversation, the sense that life was happening rather than simply being endured. Hope's confidence grew daily. He'd learned to use the dog door Lydia had installed, though he still preferred human company for garden adventures. He could find any of his toys by scent and sound, locate treats hidden around the cottage, and even distinguish between different types of kibble by smell alone. He's not just surviving, Lydia realized during one of their evening garden walks. He's thriving. He's becoming exactly who he was meant to be, blindness and all. The observation struck her as profound. She'd spent months seeing her divorce as a failure, her retreat to the cottage as defeat, her inability to salvage her marriage as personal inadequacy. But watching Hope embrace his limitations as simply the parameters within which he'd build an extraordinary life, she began to wonder if she'd been approaching her own recovery all wrong. Maybe healing wasn't about returning to who she'd been before. Maybe it was about discovering who she could become now, with all her scars and wisdom and hard-earned understanding of what truly mattered. Maybe brokenness wasn't the opposite of wholeness. Maybe it was just a different way of being. Complete. Hope's bell chimed as he investigated a new scent near the garden gate, Sunny close beside him, but not hovering. Their partnership had become a study in trust and independence, protection and freedom. Sunny offered guidance without control, safety without suffocation, presence without possession. That's what love looks like, Lydia murmured, watching them. Together, not ownership, but stewardship. Not fixing, but accepting. Not changing someone, but helping them become their best self. The words hung in the mountain air like a revelation. She thought about her marriage, about the ways she and David had tried to reshape each other instead of supporting who they actually were. She thought about her own recovery, about how she'd been waiting to feel normal again instead of learning to feel authentic. Hope bounded back toward her, his bell announcing his approach, his tail wagging with the pure joy of a successful adventure. When he reached her, he sat automatically, a behavior they'd been practicing, and looked up toward, her face with trust so complete it took her breath away. "Good boy," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're such a good, brave boy." As they returned to the cottage, Hope confident on the familiar path and Sunny padding beside them both, Lydia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about tomorrow. Not anxiety about what might go wrong, but anticipation of what might go right. Hope had taught her that adaptation wasn't surrender. It was wisdom. And wisdom, she was learning, might be the most beautiful way to see the world. The worn leather journal felt familiar in Lydia's hands as she settled into her grandmother's rocking chair. Hope curled contentedly at her feet, and Sunny stretched across the hearthrug. 6 weeks had passed since that snowy evening when their unlikely family had formed, and the transformation in all three of them seemed worth documenting. "Day 42, she wrote, then paused to watch Hope's ears swivel toward the sound of her pen scratching across paper. His awareness of the world around him had become so acute that he responded to sounds she barely noticed. The settling of the house, the whisper of pages turning, the distant call of mountain birds. Hope navigated the entire garden perimeter today without guidance, she continued. Not just the main path, but the smaller trails to the herb garden and the old apple tree. His mental mapping skills continued to amaze me. Dr. Martinez was right, dogs. Adapt to blindness with a grace that puts human assumptions to shame. The morning had brought their first real test of Hope's independence. Mrs. Chen from the neighboring cabin had stopped by to borrow eggs. bringing her grandson Tommy, a shy 8-year-old who'd been visiting for the summer. Hope had never encountered a child before, and Lydia had watched nervously as Tommy approached with the unpredictable energy of youth. But Hope had handled the introduction beautifully. He'd approached slowly, using his nose to understand this new person, then settled beside Tommy with the intuitive gentleness that seemed built into his character. Within minutes, the boy was giggling as Hope's bell chimed with each movement. Delighted by this dog who played games by sound and scent instead of sight. "He's not blind," Tommy had declared with the matter-of-fact wisdom of childhood. "He just sees different." The observation had stayed with Lydia all day. Children, she reflected, didn't bring the same complicated assumptions about disability that adults carried. To Tommy, Hope was simply a dog who experienced the world through different senses. Not less capable, just differently capable. "Mrs. Chun invited us to the community potluck next weekend," she wrote. "The idea terrifies me. 6 months ago, I came here to hide from the world, to lick my wounds in private. But Hope has changed that equation. He's not ashamed of being different, so why should I be ashamed of being hurt?" The potluck invitation had stirred up emotions. Lydia thought she'd settled. Part of her wanted to decline, to maintain the safe isolation she'd cultivated. But watching Hope greet each new experience with curiosity rather than fear made her own social anxiety seem less like protection and more like limitation. Sunny had developed her own relationship with the journal-writing ritual. Each evening, she'd position herself where she could observe both Hope and Lydia, as if understanding that these quiet moments served an important purpose in their family's routine. Her presence was never intrusive. She simply offered the comfort of steady companionship while Lydia processed the day's experiences. "Hope's play behavior continues to evolve," Lydia wrote, smiling as she remembered the afternoon's entertainment. "He's invented a game where he drops his rope toy, then tracks it by scent and sound. When he finds it, he brings it back to the exact spot where he dropped it and starts over. It's like a self-designed training exercise disguised as fun." The cottage had settled into rhythms that felt as natural as breathing. Morning walks in the garden, afternoon training sessions, evening explorations of new sounds and scents. Hope's confidence had grown to the point where he'd begun initiating games rather than simply responding to Lydia's guidance. His latest achievement was learning to distinguish between different people by their footsteps. When Lydia approached, his tail wagged with familiar joy. When Dr. Martinez had visited the week before, Hope had tilted his head with polite curiosity. When the mail carrier climbed the front steps, Hope had issued a single dignified woof, not aggressive, but alerting. "He's becoming a real dog," she wrote, then laughed at her own words. "What I mean is, he's not just surviving his blindness, he's developing personality, preferences, opinions. He's figured out that squeaky toys are more interesting than rope toys. That morning sunshine is perfect for napping, that Sunny's patience has limits when he's being too playful." The relationship between Hope and Sunny continued to fascinate her. The golden retriever had never been maternal with other animals, but with Hope, she developed protective instincts that seemed both natural and purposeful. She'd learned to position herself between Hope and potential hazards without hovering, to offer guidance without control, to provide security without creating dependence. "Sunny is teaching me as much as she's teaching Hope," Lydia reflected in her journal, about the difference between helping and enabling, between protection and overprotection. She keeps him safe without making him feel helpless. There's wisdom in that balance. The evening light was fading, casting the cottage in the golden glow. That had become Lydia's favorite time of day. Hope stirred at her feet, then rose and padded to his water bowl with the confident navigation that no longer surprised her. His bell chimed softly, a sound that had become as much a part of the cottage's music as the crackling fire and Sunny's contented sighs. "I'm beginning to understand something," she wrote, her pen moving more slowly as she searched for the right words. "Hope isn't overcoming his blindness. He's demonstrating that blindness was never the limitation I thought it was. The limitation was in my understanding of what constitutes a full life." She paused, listening to Hope's methodical drinking. Gentle lap of his tongue against water, the satisfied sigh that followed. These small sounds of contentment had become precious to her, evidence of trust and security that she'd helped create. "Tomorrow we'll try the hiking trail behind the cottage," she decided, writing the commitment as a way of making it real. Just the easy loop to start, but it's time to expand his world beyond the garden. Time to expand my world too. The journal had become more than a record of Hope's progress. It had become the map of her own journey back to engagement with life. Through documenting his courage, she discovered her own. Through celebrating his adaptations, she'd learned to see her own changes as growth rather than damage. Mrs. Chun's invitation to the potluck represented more than social obligation. It was an opportunity to test whether the confidence she'd found within these walls could translate to the larger world. Hope wouldn't hesitate. He'd approach new people, new smells, new experiences with the same openness he brought to everything else. "If a blind puppy can face the unknown with tail wagging," she wrote, "and surely a divorced woman can manage." A community gathering. The fire crackled lower, and Sunny stretched luxuriously before settling deeper into her favorite spot. Hope finished his drink and returned to Lydia's feet, circling twice before curling up in the exact position he'd occupied before. His routines had become as predictable as they were comforting. As Lydia closed the journal and prepared for their evening ritual of preparing Hope's bed and securing the cottage for night, she realized that somewhere in the process of caring for him, she'd stopped thinking of herself as broken. Wounded, perhaps. Changed, certainly, but not broken. Some things she was learning weren't meant to be fixed. They were meant to be transformed. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning when autumn was painting the mountain maples in shades of amber and gold. Lydia found it slipped under her door, her name written in handwriting she recognized with a jolt that went straight through her chest. David's letter, formal white envelope, her maiden name carefully scripted, as if he'd spent time deciding how to address the woman who used to be his wife. Hope sensed the change in her immediately. His head lifted from where he'd been dozing in a patch of sunlight, his ears alert to the subtle shift in her breathing. He rose and padded to her side, pressing his warm body against her legs in the way he'd learned meant comfort without questions. "It's all right, Hope," she said, though her voice carried an uncertainty that made Sunny raise her head from the hearthrug. The golden retriever's amber eyes assessed the situation with the calm intelligence that had made her such a perfect companion through Lydia's recovery. The letter felt heavier than paper should, weighted with history and complications she thought she'd left behind. For a moment, she considered throwing it away unopened. What could David possibly have to say now that the lawyers hadn't already communicated in legal language? But Hope's steady presence at her side reminded her of the courage she'd been developing. The puppy who faced each new challenge with curiosity rather than fear had taught her that running from difficulty didn't make it disappear. It just made it more frightening. She opened the envelope with hands that trembled only slightly. "Lydia," the letter began, and she could hear his voice in the careful penmanship. "I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I've been thinking about you since I heard you were living at your grandmother's place. I've made some changes in my life, and I wanted to see if we might talk. Not about getting back together. I understand that bridge is burned, but about finding some kind of peace with how things ended. I'm sober now, 97 days clean, and part of my recovery involves making amends to the people I hurt. You deserve better than what I gave you, and I'd like the chance to say that in person if you're willing. I'll be in the area next weekend for a work conference. If you're open to it, maybe we could meet for coffee? No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who used to love each other trying to find a way to say goodbye properly. I hope I hope you're happy. You always deserved happiness more than I knew how to give you. The letter was signed simply David, and below his name, a phone number she didn't recognize. Lydia sank into her grandmother's rocking chair, the letter trembling in her hands. Hope immediately positioned himself where she could reach him, offering his head for the kind of absent-minded petting that seemed to calm them both. Shani approached more cautiously, reading the emotional climate with the sensitivity that had made her such an extraordinary companion through Lydia's darkest months. 97 days sober, she whispered to Hope, whose tail gave a single, encouraging wag. The drinking hadn't been the only problem in their marriage, but it had certainly amplified every other issue until their home had become a minefield of unspoken resentments and failed communications. For 2 years, she'd waited for this letter or something like it. An acknowledgement of responsibility, an admission of the pain he'd caused, some recognition that their marriage's failure hadn't been entirely her fault. But now that it had arrived, she felt overwhelmed rather than vindicated. Hope's intuitive response to her distress amazed her. Without any training or encouragement, he'd learned to read her emotional weather and respond appropriately. When she was sad, he offered quiet companionship. When she was anxious, he provided grounding touch. When she was angry, which happened rarely but intensely, he simply waited nearby until the storm passed. "What do you think?" she asked him, though she knew he couldn't answer. "Should I see him? Should I give him the closure he's asking for?" Hope's response was to rest his chin on her knee and sigh contentedly, as if to say that some questions could only be answered by the heart, and hearts needed time to speak their truth. The cottage felt different with David's letter in it, as if his words had stirred up dust that had finally settled. Lydia found herself remembering not just the pain of their final months together, but the earlier years when they'd been genuinely happy. The way he'd made her laugh, the dreams they'd shared, the person she'd been when she believed in their future together. "The thing is," she said to Sunny, who had positioned herself nearby with the patient attention of a therapist, "I'm not the same person who married him. And I'm not the same person who left him, either. I'm someone new, someone I'm still getting to know." The transformation had been gradual, measured in small victories like Hope's growing confidence and her own willingness to engage with neighbors, to write in her journal, to imagine a future that included joy rather than just survival. She'd learned to value her own company, to find satisfaction in simple accomplishments, to love without losing herself in the process. Hope had taught her that adaptation wasn't about returning to a previous state. It was about becoming something new, and possibly better. His blindness hadn't been cured, but it had been integrated into a life of remarkable richness and purpose. Maybe her divorce was similar, not a failure to be fixed, but a change to be absorbed and transformed into wisdom. The afternoon light was fading when she finally moved to her desk and pulled out her laptop. Her response to David needed to be honest but boundaried, kind but clear. She thought about Hope's approach to new situations, curious but cautious, open but self-protective. "David," she typed, then paused to watch Hope navigate to his water bowl with the confidence that had become his signature. "Thank you for your letter and for your honesty about your recovery. I'm glad you're taking steps to heal yourself. I think meeting for coffee would be all right, but I want to be clear about what I can and can't offer. I can listen to what you need to say, and I can share my own perspective on what happened between us. But I can't provide forgiveness on demand, and I can't pretend that a conversation will undo the damage that was done. I'm a different person now than I was when we were married, and I'm still figuring out who that person is. If you can accept those limitations, then yes, we can meet. Saturday afternoon at the Mountain View Cafe would work for me. 1 hour, in public, with no expectations beyond basic human decency. She read the message twice before hitting send, then closed the laptop with a sense of resolution that surprised her. Facing David wouldn't be comfortable, but it wouldn't destroy her either. She'd survived worse things than an awkward conversation with her ex-husband. Hope's bell chimed as he settled into his evening napping spot, and the sound reminded her of how far they'd all come. The cottage that had once felt like a hiding place now felt like a launching pad, a place of strength from which she could venture into whatever came next. Some ghosts, she was learning, needed to be faced in order to be laid to rest. The knock at the door came on a gray Saturday morning while Lydia was preparing for her afternoon meeting with David. Hope's ears perked at the unfamiliar sound, not the casual rap of neighbors or the official knock of delivery drivers, but something urgent and desperate that made Sunny rise from her spot by the fire with unusual alertness. Through the window, Lydia could see a middle-aged couple standing on her porch, the woman clutching something against her chest, while the man's arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. They looked haggard, as if they'd been traveling for days, and there was something about their posture that spoke of profound grief, barely held in check. "Can I help you?" Lydia asked as she opened the door, Hope pressing close to her legs in. A protective gesture that had become instinctive. The woman's gasp was audible when she saw Hope. Her free hand flew to her mouth, and tears immediately began streaming down her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, it's him. Robert, it's really him." The man stepped forward, his own eyes filling as he looked down at Hope. "We're sorry to bother you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're Tom and Sarah Mitchell. We've been looking for our dog for 3 months. We think you have our Scout." The words hit Lydia like cold water. She looked down at Hope, who had tilted his head toward the strangers' voices with polite curiosity, his tail giving a tentative wag at their obvious emotion. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. This is Hope. I found him abandoned in the woods 2 months ago." Sarah Mitchell pulled out what she'd been holding against her chest, a faded photograph, showing a young girl with a golden puppy who looked remarkably like Hope. The resemblance was unmistakable, from the distinctive white patch on his chest to the shape of his ears. "This is our daughter Emma with Scout when she first brought him home," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Emma died in a car accident 3 months ago. Scout was thrown from the vehicle and disappeared into the woods. We've been searching for him ever since." The photograph trembled in Lydia's hands as she studied it more closely. The puppy in the picture was definitely Hope. There was no question about it. But the implications of this revelation made her feel dizzy with confusion and loss. "He was blind when I found him," she said weakly, grasping for some explanation that would make this nightmare go away. "He was born that way," Tom confirmed gently. "Emma loved him exactly as he was. She said his blindness made him more special, not less. She trained him, cared for him, called him her miracle puppy because he'd come from a shelter where no one else wanted a disabled dog." Hope seemed to sense the emotional charge in the air. He pressed closer to Lydia, his small body trembling slightly, as if he understood that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't comprehend. "We've been driving through every town within 100 miles, Sarah continued, wiping her eyes. "Posting flyers, checking shelters, following every lead. A woman at the post office in town mentioned that someone had found a blind puppy, and we had to come see... We understand this must be shocking," Tom added, his lawyer's training evident in his measured tone. "And we can see how much you care about him, but he's all we have left of Emma. He's the only living connection to our daughter." Lydia felt the walls of her carefully rebuilt world crumbling around her. Hope wasn't just her companion. He was her purpose, her healing, her evidence that love could triumph over loss. The cottage without him would be empty again, echoing with the silence she'd worked so hard to fill. "How can you be sure it's the same dog?" she asked, though even as she spoke, she knew it was a desperate question. The photograph was too clear, the timing too precise, the physical characteristics too exact. Sarah knelt down slowly, extending her hand toward Hope. "Scout," she called softly. "Scout, baby, it's me." Hope's reaction was subtle but unmistakable. His ears perked in a way Lydia had never seen before. His head tilted with intense focus, and he took several tentative steps towards Sarah's voice. Not the confident stride he used in familiar territory, but the careful approach of someone trying to place a half-remembered scent, a dimly recalled voice. "He remembers," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking completely. "Oh, Scout, we've missed you so much." But when Sarah reached out to touch him, Hope stepped back toward Lydia, pressing against her legs in the gesture that had become their signal for safety and home. The confusion in his body language was heartbreaking. Some part of him recognized these people, but his loyalty and trust now belonged elsewhere. "This is impossible," Lydia said, though she knew it wasn't impossible at all. It was simply devastating. He's been through so much. Moving him again, disrupting his routine, it could traumatize him. "We understand your concern," Tom said carefully, "and we can see that you've given him excellent care. But legally, he's our property. We have his registration papers, his veterinary records, photographs documenting his ownership from the day Emma brought him home." The word property made Lydia flinch. Hope wasn't property. He was family, purpose, the center around which her new life had been built. But she also understood the Mitchells' grief, the desperate need to hold on to any piece of their lost daughter. Sunny had been watching the entire exchange with her usual intelligence, and now she moved to position herself between Hope and the Thayer and strangers. Not aggressively, but protectively, as if she too sensed that their carefully balanced world was under threat. Could we come in and talk about this?" Sarah asked. "I know this is overwhelming for everyone, but maybe we can find a way to work this out that considers what's best for Scout." The irony wasn't lost on Lydia that she'd been preparing to face David, to confront one painful piece of her past, only to have a much more devastating challenge appear on her doorstep. But Hope's presence at her side reminded her of the courage she'd been developing, the strength that came from loving something more than you feared losing it. "All right," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "But his name is Hope now. He's been Hope for 2 months, and that's who he is to me." As the Mitchells entered the cottage, Hope's bell chimed with each uncertain step he took. The sound that had once represented confidence and joy now seemed to ring with anxiety and confusion. He was caught between two worlds, two families, two versions of love that both claimed him completely. Lydia watched him struggle with the competing loyalties and realized that the real test of love might not be the willingness to fight for someone, but the wisdom to know when letting go was the greater act of devotion. The cottage that had been their sanctuary now felt like a courtroom, where the most important case of her life was about to be decided. And the evidence against her was overwhelming, not because she'd loved Hope any less than his original family, but because sometimes love itself created impossible choices that had no good answers. The faded photograph lay on her coffee table. Like an accusation, and Hope or Scout sat between them all, a small, blind dog who had somehow become the center of a grief so profound that it threatened to tear apart the very healing he had made possible. Outside, the gray clouds that had been gathering all morning finally opened, and rain began to fall on the cottage roof with the sound of tears that couldn't be stopped. For 3 days, the cottage held its breath while 3 adults tried to untangle a grief so complicated that no legal proceeding could address its complexity. Hope Scout moved between them all like a small diplomat, offering comfort to everyone, while understanding that his very presence had become the source of their pain. The Mitchells had taken rooms at the Mountain Inn, But they spent their days at Lydia's cottage, sharing stories of Emma and watching Hope navigate the space he'd learned to call home. Sarah would weep quietly as she observed his confidence with the layout, his easy companionship with Sonny, his obvious trust in Lydia's care. Tom documented everything with the methodical attention of someone building a case, though his own. Eyes filled with tears when Hope brought him his favorite squeaky ball. "She taught him that trick," Sarah whispered, watching Hope drop the ball at Tom's feet and wait expectantly. Emma spent hours teaching him to fetch by sound. She said it proved that blindness was just another way of seeing the world clearly. Lydia's heart broke a little more with each shared memory. The picture of Emma that emerged was of a remarkable young woman 16 years old, passionate about animal rescue, planning to become a veterinarian, devoted to proving that special needs animals deserved the same love as any other creature. Hope hadn't just been her pet. He'd been her mission, her proof that different didn't mean less worthy. She found him at a shelter when he was 12 weeks old. Tom explained during one of their afternoon conversations. The shelter had been trying to place him for a month, but people kept passing him by when they learned about his blindness. Emma took one look at him and said, "He's perfect exactly as he is." The story made Lydia's throat tight with emotion. She'd thought she was Hope's first real home, his salvation from abandonment. Learning that he'd already known that kind of love and lost it so traumatically made his trust in her seem even more precious and his potential loss even more devastating. Hope's squeaky ball had become the symbol of their impossible situation. Sarah had brought Emma's journal from home, and they'd read aloud the entry from the day she taught him the game. "Scout learned to fetch today. It took patience and lots of treats, but he figured out how to track the ball by sound and bring it back. Dad says I'm spoiling him, but I think love is supposed to spoil the people we care about. Scout deserves to be spoiled. He's been brave his whole life. Now he gets to be happy too." The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. Emma's voice, preserved in teenage handwriting, expressed exactly what Lydia had felt about Hope's courage and deserving of happiness. Two people, separated by age and tragedy, had seen the same extraordinary spirit in this small, blind dog. Dr. Martinez had agreed to mediate their discussions. His decades of experience with difficult animal custody cases lending weight to the conversations. He'd examined Hope thoroughly, confirming his excellent health and noting the remarkable adaptation he'd achieved in Lydia's care. "The question isn't about who loves him more," the veterinarian said gently during one particularly difficult afternoon. "It's about what's truly best for him. And that's complicated by the fact that he's thriving in his current environment while also showing signs of recognition for his original family." Hope's confusion was heartbreaking to witness. He'd approached Sarah with tentative curiosity, his body language suggesting half-remembered familiarity, but he'd returned to Lydia for reassurance and safety. With Tom, he was polite but distant. With Emma's belongings, a sweater that still held her scent, a collar she'd decorated with his name, he showed more definitive recognition, his entire body responding to smells that stirred memories he couldn't quite access. "It's like he knows something important happened. He can't piece together what," Lydia observed, watching him investigate Emma's sweater with intense focus before returning to his spot beside Sonny. The legal reality was straightforward. The Mitchells had registration papers, veterinary records, and photographic documentation proving their ownership. Their lawyer had confirmed that Lydia, despite her months of devoted care, had no legal claim to a dog that had never been formally abandoned. But the emotional reality was far more complex. Hope had bonded with Lydia and Sonny, had learned to navigate their world, had become integral to Lydia's own healing process. Moving him again could be traumatic, undoing months of careful adaptation and trust building. "There's something else to consider," Sarah said quietly on the third evening, her voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. "Emma's last diary entry. the night before the accident. She wrote about Scout getting bigger, about wanting to find him. A companion dog, because she was going to college in a year and didn't want him to be lonely. She pulled out a small leather journal, worn from constant handling. She wrote, "Scout deserves a family that can be with him always. I love him too much to make him wait alone while I'm away at school. Maybe Mom and Dad would let us get another dog, someone who could be his friend and guide. Scout has so much love to give, he shouldn't have to give it to an empty house." The words hung in the cottage air like a benediction and a judgment. Emma, in her teenage wisdom, had already recognized what the adults were struggling to understand, that love sometimes meant making choices based on the beloved's needs, rather than your own desires. Tom pulled out his phone and showed them photos. From the months before the accident. Emma and Scout in the backyard. Emma teaching him to navigate obstacle courses. Emma lying on her bedroom floor, while Scout slept curled against her side. But in every photo, Tom pointed out, Scout looked slightly anxious when Emma wasn't directly beside him. She was his entire world, Tom said quietly. Without her, he was lost. Maybe that's why he went so far into the woods after the accident. He was looking for her, not understanding that she wasn't coming back. Lydia felt tears streaming down her face as she imagined Hope, then Scout, wandering the wilderness in search of the girl who had loved him first and best. The thought of his confusion, his loyalty driving him deeper into danger, made her own attachment seem almost selfish. "But he's not lost anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He has a home, a routine, a companion. He's safe and loved and confident. Isn't that what Emma would have wanted for him?" Sarah looked at Hope, who had fallen asleep at Lydia's feet with one paw touching Sonny's golden fur. She would have wanted him to be happy, she said finally, even if his happiness came from someone else's love. The cottage grew quiet except for the gentle sound of Hope's breathing and the crackling fire. Outside, the mountain held its own counsel, offering no easy answers to the humans struggling with questions that had no perfect solutions. Tomorrow, they would have to decide. The Mitchells' hotel reservation expired. Lydia's meeting with David had been postponed but not canceled, and Hope continued to live in the suspended reality of a future he couldn't influence but would be forced to accept as Lydia prepared for. Another sleepless night. She realized that the real test of her recovery wasn't whether she could keep Hope, but whether she could love him enough to let him go if that's what his true happiness required. The cottage had taught her about healing, but now it would teach her about sacrifice and whether the two were sometimes inseparably intertwined. Hope's squeaky ball lay beside his bed, silent in the darkness, waiting for tomorrow's games that might never come. The morning of decision arrived with unexpected clarity, as if the mountain itself had decided to offer its blessing on whatever choice emerged from the cottage. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the small gathering that would determine Hope's future. Lydia, the Mitchells, Dr. Martinez, and the two dogs who had become so central to everyone's healing. Hope seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. He moved between the adults with careful attention, offering his presence to each person as if he understood that comfort would be needed regardless of the outcome. Sunny maintained her position near the fireplace, watchful but calm, her amber eyes tracking every movement with the wisdom that had made her such an extraordinary guide. "We need to talk about what Scout needs," Dr. Martinez began, his voice carrying the gentle authority that had made him the natural mediator for their impossible situation. Not what any of us want, but what serves his best interests. Sarah Mitchell sat forward, her hands clasped tightly around the letter she'd been holding since her arrival. "Tom and I have been talking all night," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that had been falling for days. "We brought something that might help everyone understand our decision." She unfolded a single sheet of paper, recognizable as Emma's handwriting even from across the room. This was in Emma's diary, written 2 weeks before the accident. We found it when we were going through her things, trying to understand what she would have wanted for Scout. Tom's voice was thick with emotion as he began to read his daughter's final thoughts about her beloved dog. I've been thinking about Scout's future a lot lately. He's getting bigger and stronger, and I can see how much he loves having space to explore. But I'll be leaving for college next year, and even though Mom and Dad love him, they don't understand him the way I do. They worry about his blindness instead of celebrating his adaptation. Scout deserves someone who sees his capabilities, not his limitations. Someone who won't treat him like he's fragile, but will love him for exactly who he is. I hope someday he finds a person who understands that being different is just another way of being wonderful. The words filled the cottage with a presence that felt almost tangible, as if Emma herself had joined their circle to offer guidance. Hope lifted his head toward Tom's voice, his ears alert to the emotional charge in the reading, his body language suggesting recognition of something beyond the words themselves. She knew, Sarah said softly, wiping her eyes. Even at 16, she understood that love sometimes means wanting something different than what we need. She loved Scout completely, but she also knew that her love might not be what was best for his future. Lydia felt her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. The generosity in Emma's words, the mature recognition that love and letting go were sometimes the same action, challenged everything she'd been feeling about her right to keep hope. There's more, Tom continued, his voice strengthening. Emma wrote about her dream for Scout. I want him to have a life where he can be confident and independent, where he has other dogs to teach him things I can't, where he lives with someone who has time to help him become everything he's capable of being. I want him to be loved not because he needs extra care, but because he gives extra joy. Hope chose that moment to approach Sarah, pressing his warm body against her legs in the gesture of comfort he'd perfected with Lydia. Sarah's breath caught as she reached down to stroke his head, her touch tentative but full of recognition. He's beautiful, she whispered. Emma would be so proud of how confident he's become. Look how he moves, how sure he is of himself. That's not the anxious puppy who used to hide under her bed during thunderstorms. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, his professional demeanor softening. What are you saying, Sarah? She looked up at Lydia, her eyes clear despite her tears. I'm saying that Emma's last wish for Scout was that he find the kind of love that helps him flourish, not the kind that holds him back out of fear of losing him. And it's obvious to anyone with eyes that he's found exactly that. Tom nodded, reaching over to squeeze his wife's hand. We came here expecting to take him home, to hold on to the last piece of our daughter. But Emma raised us better than that. She taught us that love means wanting someone's happiness more than your own. Comfort. The cottage fell silent, except for the gentle chiming of Hope's bell as he moved to investigate a scent near the window. The sound that had once represented his growing confidence now seemed to ring with possibility, with futures that could unfold in multiple directions, depending on the choices made in this room. Are you saying ... double quotes Lydia began, hardly daring to hope. We're saying that Emma would want Scout to stay where he's happy, Sarah replied, pulling out a pen and beginning to write on the back of Emma's letter. We're saying that sometimes the greatest act of love is recognizing when someone else can offer what we cannot. Sarah's pen moved across the paper with quiet determination, crafting words that would change all their lives. To Lydia, she wrote, Emma believed that love multiplies when it's shared, and that the best gift we can give someone we love is the freedom to be their truest self. Scout has found that freedom with you. We transfer his care to you not because we love him less, but because we love him enough to want his happiness more than our own comfort. Please accept this gift from Emma, through us, to you, the chance to give Scout the life she dreamed of for him. As Sarah wrote, Hope made his way around the room with purposeful steps, stopping at each person as if taking a final inventory of the emotional landscape. When he reached Lydia, He settled beside her chair with a contented sigh that seemed to express his own vote in the matter. "But I want you to understand something," Tom said, his lawyer's instincts emerging even through his grief. "This isn't goodbye. Emma loved Scout too much for us to disappear from his life completely. We'd like to visit sometimes, if that's all right with you. To see how he's growing, to share stories about Emma, to be part of his extended family." The word family hung in the air with new meaning, not the nuclear definition that had shaped their original assumptions, but something more fluid and generous, a network of love that could expand rather than exclude, that could honor the past while embracing the future. "I would love that," Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. "Hope should know about Emma, should understand how much she loved him. Her memory should be part of his story." Dr. Martinez wiped his eyes openly, his professional composure finally breaking. "In 37 years of practice, I've never seen anything quite like this," he said. "Most custody disputes end with lawyers and bitterness. This is ending with wisdom and grace." Sarah finished writing and folded the letter carefully, handing it to Lydia with ceremony. "This is Emma's final gift to Scout," she said, "and our gift to you. The legal transfer of ownership, written in love rather than legalese." But Tom held up his hand. "There's one more thing," he said, reaching into his jacket. "Emma would have wanted Scout to have this." He pulled out a small leather collar, hand-tooled with intricate designs and fitted with a tag that read Scout on one side and Emma's boy on the other. Hope's response to the collar was immediate and profound. His entire body stiffened with recognition, and he made a sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a whine, but something that spoke of memory awakening. He approached Tom with steps that seemed to remember a different rhythm, a different relationship. "We'd like him to wear both collars," Sarah said softly. "Emma's to remember where he came from, and yours to celebrate where he's going. Would that be all right?" Lydia nodded, unable to speak as she watched Tom gently fasten Emma's collar alongside the simple brown leather one she'd made. The bells chimed together, now past and present, creating a harmony that seemed to settle something deep in Hope's heart. "He's not choosing between us," she realized aloud. "He's integrating all the love he's received into who he is now." Hope stood between them all, wearing symbols of every relationship that had shaped him, his tail wagging with what could only be described as relief. The tension that had marked the past 3 days seemed to lift from his small body as if he finally understood that love didn't require abandoning previous attachments. It required expanding to include them all. "There's one more thing Emma would have wanted," Sarah said, pulling out the squeaky ball from Hope's early days. "She always said that play was how Scout learned best. Would you teach him some new games for Emma?" As Hope's excited response to his old toy filled the cottage with the sound of pure joy, Lydia realized that they'd found something rarer than resolution. They'd found transformation. The grief that had threatened to tear them apart had instead become the foundation for a new kind of family, one built on shared love for a small, blind dog who had taught them all that healing could happen without forgetting, that moving forward didn't require leaving the past behind. The morning sun streaming through the cottage windows seemed to bless their unlikely solution, and Hope's double bells chimed like celebration as he played with renewed confidence, secure in the knowledge that he was loved not just by one family, but by a constellation of people whose lives he'd changed simply by being exactly who he was. 6 months later, the cottage held a different kind of warmth, not the desperate heat of hiding from the world, but the gentle glow of a home that had learned to welcome it. Hope moved through the familiar spaces with the confidence of someone who belonged completely, his double bells creating a music that had become the soundtrack to their daily joy. The family portrait sat prominently on the mantel, a testament to the expanded definition of love they'd all discovered. Lydia in her grandmother's rocking chair, Hope confident at her feet, Sunny dignified beside them both, and, in the most natural thing in the world, Tom and Sarah, flanking the group with smiles that spoke of healing rather than loss. Dr. Martinez had taken the photo during one of the Mitchells' monthly visits, capturing a moment when grief and joy had finally learned to coexist. "He's grown so much," Sarah observed during their latest visit, watching Hope navigate the garden with the expertise of someone who could map the world through scent and sound alone. His confidence had evolved beyond mere adaptation. He moved, now with the assurance of a dog who had never doubted his place in the world. The cottage garden had become Hope's masterpiece of navigation. He knew every plant, every pathway, every sunny spot perfect for afternoon naps. The herb garden responded to his presence with fragrant welcomes. The old apple tree provided shade for his contemplative moments, and the small pond reflected sunlight. That warmed his face, even though he couldn't see it sparkle. Lydia's journal had evolved too, transforming from a record of recovery into a celebration of daily miracles. Hope invented a new game today. She'd written the week before. He drops his squeaky ball at the top of the garden slope and chases it down by sound alone. When he catches it, he brings it back to the exact starting spot and begins again. Sunny watches with what I swear is amusement, as if she's proud of her student's creativity. The relationship between Hope and Sunny had deepened into something approaching telepathy. The golden retriever still served as guide and protector, but now Hope reciprocated with emotional support that seemed to keep Sunny younger than her years. They developed their own communication system, gentle touches, shared sleeping spaces, collaborative investigation of interesting scents. "Emma would be amazed," Tom said, settling into the chair that had become designated as his during visits. She always believed Scout was extraordinary, but I don't think even she imagined he'd become this confident, this joyful. The integration of Emma's memory into Hope's daily life had been seamless and healing for everyone. Her photograph sat beside Hope's bed, and Lydia often told him stories about the girl who had first recognized his worth. The cottage had absorbed Emma's presence without diminishing anyone else's. She'd become part of their family history, honored but not mourned, remembered but not clung to. Hope's training had progressed beyond anything Dr. Martinez had predicted. He could navigate complex obstacle courses, distinguish between different family members by their footsteps alone, and even alert Lydia to visitors long before they reached the door. His blindness had become irrelevant to his capabilities. He simply experienced excellence through different senses. The community potluck last month was incredible, Lydia told the Mitchells, remembering the evening when Hope had charmed an entire room full of neighbors. Children were lined up to meet him. Adults were asking about his training techniques, and Hope held court like the celebrity he's become. Mrs. Chun's grandson Tommy appointed himself Hope's official interpreter, explaining to everyone how Hope sees with his heart instead of his eyes. The story made Sarah smile with the kind of joy that had taken months to rediscover. Emma used to say the same thing. That Scout taught her how many different ways there were to see the world clearly. Lydia's own transformation had been as remarkable as Hope's. The woman who had arrived at the cottage broken and defensive had evolved into someone who welcomed challenges, embraced community, and understood that healing wasn't about returning to a previous state. It was about becoming someone new and stronger. Her meeting with David, finally rescheduled and completed, had been cordial and closing rather than reopening old wounds. They'd found peace with their past and genuine wishes for each other's future happiness. "I never did thank you properly," she said to the Mitchells during one of their quiet evening conversations, "for choosing Hope's happiness over your own grief, for trusting me with Emma's most precious gift, for teaching me that family doesn't have to be limited by blood or law. It can be defined by love and choice." The cottage had become a pilgrimage, site of sorts for people dealing with special needs animals. Dr. Martinez regularly sent clients to observe Hope's adaptation techniques, and Lydia had begun informally mentoring other families navigating similar challenges. Her story of healing through caring for hope had spread through the mountain community, offering hope to others who felt broken beyond repair. The beautiful thing, she'd written in her most recent journal entry, is that Hope doesn't think of himself as inspirational or extraordinary. To him, he's simply a dog who loves his family, enjoys his daily adventures, and trusts that tomorrow will bring new opportunities for joy. His blindness isn't a limitation he's overcome. It's simply part of who he is, no more defining than the color of his fur or the sound of his bark. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant colors, Hope couldn't see but could smell in the changing air. The cottage settled into the rhythm that had become their signature, purposeful without being hurried, peaceful without being isolated, loving without being possessive. The small velvet box that had once held Lydia's wedding ring now contained a different treasure, a lock of Emma's hair that Sarah had given them, a tangible connection to the girl whose love had made Hope's rescue possible. It sat in Lydia's dresser drawer, not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder that love creates circles that expand far beyond what we can imagine. Hope's double bells chimed as he settled for his evening nap, the sound that had once marked uncertainty now ringing with the contentment of someone who had found his place in the world. Outside, the mountain held its breath in preparation for winter, but inside the cottage, warmth radiated from hearts that had learned the most important lesson of all, that love shared is love multiplied, and that healing happens not in isolation, but in the brave choice to open our hearts to the possibility that tomorrow might be better than we dared to hope.